Hello, and welcome back to Crime Labs. Today, we will be covering the story of Jessica Gutierrez. If you would like to hear more information about this case, please visit the Cola City Crime Podcast in the description below. We begin this story of mystery and terror on the warm evening of June 5th, 1986, in Lexington, South Carolina. The Gutierrez family had spent the afternoon working in their yard, and when it was time, they went inside to have dinner. The mother, Deborah, cleaned up after dinner, and her youngest daughter, 4-year-old Jessica Gutierrez, begged her mom to paint her nails and let her sleep in bed with her. Deborah had let Jesse sleep with her the night before, but her son, who was Jesse's older brother, had an ear infection, so Deborah decided he would cuddle up with her to feel better. So after a fun evening with her mom, Jesse crawled into bed shortly after 11:30 p.m. Sometime after, when she fell asleep, at 9 a.m. the next morning, an intruder broke into the Gutierrez home by removing the screen from a living room window and climbing through. The intruder snuck into the girl's room, lifted Jessica out of her bed without waking her, and left with her through the front door. Unfortunately, this would be the last time Jessica was ever in her home with her family. The next morning, Deborah was awoken by Rebecca requesting cereal for breakfast, so she did what moms do and got up to feed her children. She was definitely not expecting to see what she did after leaving her bedroom. School papers were thrown all over the girl's room, the front door was wide open, and the family dog, who was kept outside, was roaming the house. However, there was no missing property from the home, and Deborah said that Jesse would never just wander off in the middle of the night, even though she was only 4. Rebecca, who was 6 years old, said she was too scared to tell her mom what she saw last night until now, but she was able to tell her that she saw someone take Jesse. She's gone. The man with the magic hat and beard took her last night. Deborah was frantic and couldn't fathom why Rebecca didn't say something while Jesse was being taken. Why hadn't she made a sound, got up to tell her mom, woke up her other sister in the bedroom? Rebecca later remembered that she was just paralyzed with fear and couldn't fall back asleep after the man left with her sister. Of course, Deborah called the police immediately to report her missing, and once they arrived, they started assessing the scene. She was then questioned by police to see if anyone close to her might have a motive for taking her daughter. Deborah's mind started racing, combing through who might have done this, and 2 people were at the top of her list. First was her ex-boyfriend, who just a few days earlier had been kicked out of their house for abusing alcohol and being overly possessive. She accused him of abducting her, but he claimed to not have any idea of what happened. Later, after repeated questioning from the police, he was eventually cleared. Deborah also thought of her ex-husband, David Romero Gutierrez Ruiz, as a possible suspect in Jesse's abduction, since he was only in America on a green card and had no parental rights over any of the children. They had divorced 3 years prior, in 1983, and he was constantly threatening Deborah, saying he would get the children. He also was ruled out because at the time of the abduction, David was living in California. He had proof and had no idea that she had been taken. Investigators started a thorough search of the home to see if the abductor left anything behind, and they ended up finding a lone fingerprint on the window that was used to enter the house. It was on the outside of the window, which would indicate the person who broke in left it, since Deborah cleaned the windows religiously every night before bed. The print was described as fresh and not weathered, and it was sent to the FBI for testing. But unfortunately, there were no matches in the system at the time. After thinking her ex-husband and ex-boyfriend might be the ones behind her daughter's abduction, Deborah thought about someone else that might be behind this. The other person that came to mind would be a family acquaintance, 27-year-old West Columbia resident Thomas Eric McDowell. But at the time, Thomas had no prior arrest or convictions, which means his fingerprints were not in the system. With no other suspects, and Deborah's ex-husband and ex-boyfriend being cleared, they were all just waiting to see what would happen and praying for a miracle. Coincidentally, a few weeks after Jessica's disappearance, police found some hope with the case of the missing 4-year-old. Thomas McDowell had stolen a van from somewhere in Lexington County and fled to North Carolina. There, he would break into the home of an unidentified woman and rape her as she slept. Soon after committing these crimes, he was arrested and convicted for sexual assault and auto theft, which means he was fingerprinted upon intake. So with his fingerprints now in AFIS, that's the Integrated Automated Fingerprint Identification System, which had been relatively recently established by this time, they checked his with the one found on the window, and what do you know? They matched. Deborah was also able to locate Thomas's vehicle, which was abandoned when found, and inside it, police found fibers, which Deborah stated were linked to her daughter Jessica. While investigators are busy building their case against McDowell, he was charged and sent to prison for his recent crimes. It was there that we learn, from a fellow inmate, that Thomas allegedly confessed to kidnapping a girl from Lexington County, killing her, and burying her in a landfill. He stated that he did all this while wearing a tall cowboy hat. So naturally, like a good criminal in jail, the inmate spoke to the police with his confession and even sent Deborah a letter detailing their conversation. Investigators jumped on it and interrogated McDowell, and allegedly, he offered to give them all the gruesome details in exchange for immunity. Of course, this monster isn't going to get off with just a slap on the wrist, so the immunity request was denied, and he refused to speak about it anymore. With the tip from the other inmate, police went to a local landfill close to the Gutierrez home to search for Jessica's body, but came up with nothing. Although they had very little evidence, and any confession was from the mouth of another convict, investigators still figured they could bring up the potential charges to the solicitor's office, but to their disappointment, they refused to go forward with the charges due to the lack of evidence and the fear that they would not successfully convict McDowell. Thomas McDowell was released in 1997 after serving his sentence for rape and auto theft, and has been free with a new title of sex offender added to his rap sheet. Deborah was not satisfied with the investigation and continued to do a little digging on her own because she continued to believe that her ex-boyfriend had something to do with it. Deborah remembered a time where they went to Waffle House together, and her boyfriend and McDowell met up during a local gathering and talked for a while. Of course, she brought all this information to the police, but they seemed a little disinterested. She had stated on multiple occasions that there was a lack of action by police when her daughter was reported missing, and she and Sheriff James Metz had a heated phone conversation because she thought that investigators were being pulled off the case, and that call hadn't been released until 2007. Metz questioned her on why she recorded the phone call, and to his surprise, it was actually due to police tapping the phone line of the Gutierrez's home in case someone with ransom demands called. Of course, now we know that no one called, but they remained tapped, which allowed her to get the recording and transcripts of the call into her possession. She held back on releasing them for over 2 decades, but finally decided that the call was a big part of the case. So here is where I will go through some of that call, at least the parts I thought were important to show Sheriff Metz's character and how he was handling the investigation. And just to reiterate why she made the phone call in the first place, it was because Deborah was under the impression that Metz was pulling the investigators off the case. Deborah, by God, that's my youngin', and I want her brought back home. Sheriff, what do you want me to do? Someone's got to hold your hand. Deborah, listen here, I don't need you to hold my hand, and I don't need you to get smart with me either. Sheriff, I'm not going to get smart with you, but you're not going to get smart with me either, lady. I've been up all night working on your case, and I don't need your smart mouth. Deborah, well, when I ask you questions, I need answers. Sheriff, we'll give you answers when we got answers to give. Now, you mess with me, I'll pull all my people off, and we'll go home and go to bed and forget about your case. Deborah, you mean to tell me that if I mess with you, you would pull all your people off this case and go home and forget about my child? Sheriff, that's right. So once Sheriff Metz heard this portion of the conversation and received some backlash, especially from Deborah, when she said it wasn't a threat, it was no threat by no means. It was a promise, because for 21 and a half years, somebody went home and forgot my little girl. Metz claimed, I never pulled any investigator off this case. In fact, we put more investigators on the case. Metz continued to wonder why Deborah would release the call now, after all this time, and she said it was because she was afraid of Metz's power and what he might do with her daughter's case. She decided after 21 years that it was time for the call to come out so the case can move forward, because unfortunately now, in 2022, Jessica's body has still not been found. Deborah also accused authorities of mishandling the recovered evidence in the case and has called the Lexington County officials corrupt. Her belief was that they were simply holding back on making an arrest, or that they were too scared to do it. And from what I read across multiple articles, she was onto something. Sheriff Metz was later arrested in June 2014 on multiple charges: taking bribery, wire fraud, and conspiracy. He was allegedly helping illegal immigrants avoid detection at Lexington County Jail. He was convicted of all charges and sentenced to 1 year and a day in prison. He was also ordered to pay a fine and given 2 years probation and was eventually released in April 2016. Also, do you remember the solicitor that denied the police from bringing on charges to McDowell? This man's name was Donald Myers, and at the time, he was the 11th Judicial Circuit Solicitor. He had been arrested multiple times for DUI and other alcohol-related offenses, and at one point, he threatened a South Carolina victims' rights director who was helping Deborah. He called the director, Sherry Carney, and said, "You get that woman off my ass, or I will take you for everything you own. She is a squeaky wheel demanding oiling, and she'll get no greasing from Lexington County." Deborah continued to question his choice to not move forward with the charges in her daughter's case. They claimed it was due to the lack of evidence and not having a body, but coincidentally, the solicitor had tried 2 murder cases without a body after he denied charges in Jesse's case. So not only did she mention corruption, which we clearly see as true, there was also the mishandling of evidence for Jessica's case. The mishandling was due to failure to follow the chain of command, which is to help protect evidence. The evidence was supposed to be stored in an environmentally controlled area, and Metz had additions going onto the sheriff's office. So what did they do? Instead of moving it to the new part of the building for safekeeping, the case evidence was stored in a tin shed outside behind the office. So I know this case has been pretty bleak, and there aren't too many positive things happening, especially after all these years. But I am going to tell you that there is indeed a light at the end of this tunnel. So after reopening the case in September 2021, this year, January 6th, 2022, almost 36 years after Jessica was abducted, they finally arrested the main suspect, Thomas Eric McDowell, and he has been charged with kidnapping, murder, and first-degree burglary in connection to Jessica's disappearance. He was living in Wake Forest, North Carolina when they arrested him, and he is being held in a Wake County detention center with no bond. There is little information on what led investigators to arrest him after all these years, but according to FBI Columbia Special Agent Susan Forensic, the arrest was due to the many years of dedicated investigative work by local, state, and federal partners, and the resolve of citizens who never forgot Jessica. Thomas will now be tried by the South Carolina Attorney General's office. We do know that Sheriff Jay Kuhn had more than 3,500 case file pages reviewed back in September 2021, and that 10 FBI field offices were involved in the re-examination of Jessica's case. McDowell will be extradited to the Midlands for court, but currently there is no date set for his trial. To this day, Jesse's remains are still nowhere to be found. Tune into the Cola City Crime Podcast and the links in the description to hear more about this case. Thanks for watching Crime Labs. Please visit our channel to watch our playlists.